Hello everyone, my name is Benjamin, welcome to my book club. I try and be kind of a positive person out here on the internet. There's enough negativity in the world, especially these days. So I tend to only talk about the books that I really liked, the books that I thought were excellent and the books that I think you should definitely check out. Today, however, I've got 3 books that I didn't really enjoy, 3 books that didn't work for me. But that's no reason to assume they won't work for you. Everyone likes different books. I like books that other people don't like. People don't like books that I like. So today I thought I'd cover those 3 books, give you a brief rundown of why I wasn't a huge fan of them, and then for each of them give 3 things I really did like about them that I think might make them books that you would like to read. So look, let's just jump right in with the first one. The very first book is Intercepts by CJ Payne. This is a story that feels very familiar if you're aware of things like the SCP Foundation or a lot of creepypasta stories. This feels like a creepypasta idea extended into novel length. The basic premises is that some government organization, maybe shady, corporate, whatever, has been experimenting on people and placing them into deep sensory deprivation, removing all senses from them, just to see what would happen. And then that has turned into something that is exploitable for profit, for safety, for security. And this is a story about one of those facilities and the people that work there and the subjects of this torture. And why didn't I like it? Well, a few reasons. One, as I said, it kind of does feel like kind of a creepypasta expanded into a novel length. It just didn't have the legs, I think, to go the full 250, 300, 350, however many pages it was. It probably would have been fantastic as a novella or as a short story, but the writing was just, I'm not some scholar, I'm not some English major. I can't talk to you about the exact reasons why the prose wasn't working, why the sentence structure didn't work exactly, but I can tell you that it didn't work for me. The writing felt poor, it was maybe too simplistic, it didn't grip me with any of its tense, there was no real pacing given over in the writing style that made me want to turn to that next page. On top of that, our characters felt pretty flat and like one-dimensional, especially our teenage girl like protagonist, who felt very how do you do fellow children to me. And overall it just didn't come together in a satisfying sense in a novel, you know. I didn't really like the characters, I didn't really like the dialogue, the writing didn't excite me, and overall it just wasn't very scary. It was a bit thrillerish at times. But let's get into the things I did like, because there are 3 things here that I think are really worth talking about. First off is the very first chapter of the book. The very first chapter of the book, minor spoilers, takes place from the perspective of one of these test subjects, and it is the best writing in the entire book. I suspect that it's where the entire concept came from. I'd be shocked if this wasn't written first as perhaps even its own short fiction, and it's fantastically written. It's creepy, it's eerie, it's scary in the, like, you know, having empathy for this character. It's really scary to be in their position, and it's just really well written. If you don't read anything in this book, read the first chapter, it's really good. Second, the concept is fantastic. I really love the idea of the sensory deprivation stuff. I love the idea of following the subjects, following the family members of the people that work here, following the people that work here, and delving into their ambition, delving into the reasons they do this thing, delving into how they can live with themselves by doing these things. But just a lot of that isn't really touched on in the book, but the ideas are fantastic and the ideas have stuck in my head, and I would love to see this concept redone or even just fine-tuned in another go. And finally, I've worked as a government employee. There is a definite feeling of government bureaucracy in this book that is really well captured. This idea of, you know, everything done for the least amount of money possible, but getting the most amount of impact back. And the sort of impossibility of a lot of these tasks and a lot of these requests. And despite it ostensibly being a horror book, I did find the government bureaucracy quite funny and quite enjoyable at times. So I think leaning more heavily on that might make the book a bit better as well. So yeah, there's 3 reasons why I think you might like Intercepts by CJ Payne. Up next, I have now read 4 books by CJ Tudor. I have read The Chalk Man, which I thought was fantastic. I have read The Taking of Annie Thorne, which I thought was pretty good. And I have read Burning Girls, which I also thought was fantastic. So I picked up on Audible The Drift by CJ Tudor. And I think, unfortunately, this is my least enjoyable read so far this year. In The Drift, we are in a world that has gone through some sort of pandemic. There is very clearly some virus that has ravaged the world. We are in a possibly post-apocalyptic scenario. The world building here gets built up and we find out a bit more about it as we go through. But in general, there are infected people. This is kind of a zombie story, but not really. This is more a story set in a zombie world, but the zombies themselves aren't really zombies. Suffice to say, the world as we know is breaking down, and this is a survival story. Or really, this is 3 survival stories. First off, we have one character stuck in a bus in a snowdrift that has crashed along with a bunch of other characters, and it seems like the bus driver's gone missing, they don't know why they crashed, they're in the middle of a blizzard, how are they going to survive? We also have, again, a bunch of people stuck on public transport, this time stuck on a ski lift, like ski elevator, cable car. And these people are on their way to somewhere called The Retreat, which is supposed to be some sort of safe haven, it seems, from this pandemic. And when they wake up here, it appears that one of them has been murdered, and they have to figure out why the cable car is stuck. They have to figure out who murdered this person. They have to figure out how they're going to survive. And then finally, we have a third storyline taking place at this retreat, this area that was supposed to be this research haven, this area researching ways to fight the pandemic that has now devolved into sort of just a hideout / stronghold to survive day to day. It is no longer focused on research, something terrible's happened here, and we focus on the people that are here and unveiling what has happened. And the concept here is pretty interesting. The idea of like these 3 sort of closed box storylines. The characters and the dialogue are really well done. The actual writing is fantastic for the most part. The pacing and the prose are fine. My main issues come in CJ Tudor's books always have several twists and turns and reveals, and up until this point I thought all of them had been really good. The twists and turns and reveals in this book I thought were all either really, really obvious and, you know, you could see from a mile away, or really, really stupid and didn't matter and who cares, or just really dumb. None of them I would, you know, read that section and be like, aha, and then like flick back through and be like, oh, that makes sense because this and this. It was either, yep, okay, there it is, finally we've revealed that so we can stop pretending that it's some clever hint that's coming up, or it would come out of nowhere and I'd be like, oh, okay, but that doesn't advance the plot or make any interesting information come forward. It's just a twist for the sake of a twist that doesn't change anything. And look, you might have different opinions on that, but the overwhelming feeling I got from this book was just kind of disappointment and the want for it to end. But there are 3 things I thought were excellent. First off is the atmosphere. All 3 of these stories take place in snowy, stormy wilderness, and it feels cold. The prose feels cold. The descriptions of the snow and the rain and the wind make me scared for the environment, make me scared about the wilderness and about everything that's going on. And it makes me worry for these characters who I do care for at this point. And it makes me worry about their survival chances in these areas. It makes me, you know, worry about them trying to find a jacket. I want them to find a nice warm jacket. And CJ Tudor is an excellent writer and so captures that really, really well. Also, I think I mentioned before, the characters and the dialogue are fantastic. The dialogue itself feels very natural. It feels realistic. People aren't shouting off huge strings of exposition at each other. People aren't shouting corny one-liners like they're in an action movie. People are, for the most part, talking like people, and it feels really, really well done. And the characters themselves are interesting. I like most of our characters. Meg, the main character of the second part in the cable car, is probably my least favorite of our main characters, but Hannah from the first one and Connor, I think it was, from the third one, are fantastic. I really enjoyed them. And finally, this is a book with 3 very distinct and separate storylines, and they do come together very, you know, it's a satisfying conclusion the way they twist and turn into each other. The twist itself, I think, was pretty obvious from about the quarter way through, but it did keep dropping these hints like it was feeling very clever with itself. But unlike a lot of books with like 3 different storylines going through it, I can't point at any one of them and be like, this one didn't need to be here. You know, you could remove this and it's the same story. Each of the storylines serves a purpose to the end goal, and it does come together very, you know, fluently. All right, finally, I have not read The Martian by Andy Weir, but I've seen the movie and I loved it, and I have read Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir, and it is one of my favorite books of all time. I read a lot of reviews online saying that his second book, Artemis, wasn't very good and just to skip it. But as a contrarian, I've always looked at bad reviews and gone, no, I doubt it. Maybe it's not as good as The Martian, but I bet you're just angry that it wasn't what you wanted. It wasn't the same thing as before, and so you're angry about it. It wasn't The Martian 2, so you're upset. So I read Artemis, and I think that book's biggest problem actually is that it's trying to be The Martian 2. So Artemis is a story about a colony on the moon. It is a moon city, the very first of its kind, and it is about a criminal that lives there by the name of Jazz. Jazz is a non-practicing Muslim. She's in her early 20s. She is an entrepreneur. She's a smuggler. And she, like many criminals, is angling for that one big break, that one big score that'll let them leave this life behind, let them set up luxury, and live the life that they think they deserve. Now, I have a few problems with this book, but the first one is that for ostensibly a super multicultural book, right? It is a space city set up by the Kenyan Space Agency, run by many different cultures. Each area of the city is run by its own culture. Our main character is a young woman from the Islamic faith. Unfortunately, it all feels super American. I don't get any feeling of these other cultures really coming from it. For the most part, if this city had been set up by NASA and the great USA, basically nothing changes. I don't feel the culture here. I don't feel the differences. It just feels very American. And along those lines, I said that this was kind of trying a bit too hard to be The Martian 2. Jazz is trying very hard to be Mark Watney and isn't working at all. Jazz is fine as a character, but is not as charismatic as Mark Watney was, has that same kind of attitude in her voice, but it just isn't working here. And the sexualization of her character comes off as a bit skeezy here. I understand that sexualization of young women is a real thing and that, Jazz owns it and is a point of pride and point of power for her for most of the book. I guess it's just coming from me, a mid-30s male reading a book written by another male. It came off as a bit skeezy. Like, they talk about condoms a lot with one of the other characters, and I think it was supposed to be funny, but for me it just came off as super weird. Like, imagining myself talking to a female friend like that, I would feel very creepy and ick. And then in the end, the actual heist, the actual point of this, the criminal section that made it so interesting, Jazz is barely a criminal. Like so many books starring a criminal, Jazz is a criminal in that they have committed some crimes. They do some smuggling. But they're still the hero of the book. They're still morally upright. They're still a good person. They still make the morally good choices for the most part. I just would like a book that's based around criminals to be focused on actual criminals, to be focused on people that, would sell someone out for their own good, would backstab someone else if it would make them more money. And then you've got the Andy Weir everything goes to shit at the end of the book moment, which in The Martian and in Project Hail Mary I thought were fantastic, really ratcheting up the tension for the end of the book. In this one, it just felt really silly to me. There isn't the scientific backup in this book that Project Hail Mary has. We don't have the fun using science and engineering to survive like we did in The Martian and in Project Hail Mary. Overall, the plotline just isn't as satisfying. I can see hints of a fantastic book here, but for me, it just wasn't there. But there are three things I did really like. First off, the supporting cast, for the most part, are fantastic. Most of the supporting cast feel really good. A lot of them feel the sort of cultural ethnicity that they are meant to be. They feel like independent people. They don't feel like a smart aleck, smart talking cartoon character. They feel like people trying to live in this environment and make their own way. And they're written fantastically. Secondly, when we do get some of the sciencey sort of engineering and even some of the political stuff, that's fantastic. That's, I think, Andy Weir has learned from going from The Martian, seeing the reviews of the Artemis, and then having written Project Hail Mary. I think it's clear that he knows that that's the stuff he writes well now. But there's very little of it in Artemis, but the bits that are there are really, really good. He writes a really interesting political landscape that I want to know more about. He writes some really interesting scientific stuff that I want to know more about. Jazz does some really fun engineering things that I wish he would do more of. But what is there is fantastic. And the third thing that I really, really love about this book is that it is a bingo book. Bring up the bingo board. This is the R Fantasy's Bingo 2024 board. It is a set of 25 reading prompts, each with their own hard modes. And I am planning to try and finish this by the end of March next year. For this one, the square is criminals. The book has to focus on criminals, and the hard mode of the book has to feature a heist. As much as I think the heist in this book is a pretty poor one and is hardly really worth being called a heist, The book calls it a heist, all the characters call it a heist, they think it's a heist, so I'm going to call it a heist for this. So I'm going to lock in Artemis in that square. If you have any suggestions for these open squares, then please let me know. I am beginning to struggle with some of them. But there you have it. As I said, I try and be a bit more positive on this channel, but here are 3 books I didn't really like, but you might. I know people love these books, and I think some of you watching are going to be the people that will. So if any of these books sound interesting to you, please read them. If you have read them and liked them, let me know. I think everyone's opinion is valid. I think we all have different experiences when we read books, watch media, consume anything. And I think talking with people about those different experiences and learning about them is what makes this hobby so interesting. Question of the day is, what is your least favourite book you've read this year so far and why? And what are some things you loved about it anyway? If you're still watching, thank you so much. Make sure to do all the algorithm things, you know, like, comment, subscribe, but most of all, please make sure to keep reading.